Every child on Earth knows Thomas the Tank Engine. The cheerful blue locomotive has sold over 100 million books, appeared in 584 television episodes across 24 seasons, and generated more than $6 billion in merchandise sales worldwide. His face beams from lunchboxes in Tokyo, bedsheets in London, and birthday cakes in Sao Paulo. For generations, Thomas has taught lessons about friendship, hard work, and being a really useful engine, but the real locomotive that inspired this global icon. Railway engineers wanted to forget it ever existed. The London, Brighton, and South Coast Railway's E2 class rolled out of Brighton Works in 1913, a purpose-built shunting tank engine designed by Lawson Billington for the demanding work of Britain's southern dockyards. With its compact 060 wheel arrangement and distinctive side tanks, the E2 was engineered to navigate the tight curves and steep inclines of places like New Haven Harbor and the Brighton fish docks. On paper, the specifications looked solid. 6 coupled driving wheels for maximum adhesion, radial trailing axles for improved curve handling, large capacity side tanks, eliminating the need for a separate tender. The railway ordered 10 units between 1913 and 1916, confident they had found the perfect solution for their coastal operations. Yet inside the maintenance logs at Brighton Works, a different story was already emerging. Crew reports described rough riding qualities and poor visibility from the cramped cab, where those same side tanks that promised efficiency now blocked sight lines during critical shunting maneuvers. Derailment incident forms began piling up at division offices with unsettling frequency. By the mid-1920s, the phrase temperamental on curves appeared in engineering assessments with troubling regularity. While Thomas the Tank Engine would eventually charm millions with tales of adventure on the island of Sodor, the real E2 locomotives were quietly building a reputation as some of the most problematic engines ever to wear LB&SC livery. The question railway historians still debate is simple. If these engines were the inspiration for the world's most beloved locomotive, why did every single one vanish from British rails before the preservation movement could save them? The answer lies not in children's stories, but in accident reports, budget ledgers, and the cold mathematics of engineering failure. Lawson Billington inherited the chief mechanical engineer's post at Brighton Works with ambition burning in his veins. His father had designed successful locomotives for the LB&SC, and the younger Billington was determined to prove himself with innovations that would outshine the rival workshops at Eastleigh and Swindon. The E2 class represented his vision for the future of dock shunting. The engines needed power for the brutal inclines leading up from New Haven's Fish Quays, where grades reached 1 in 45, and laden wagons of fresh catch strained every coupling. They needed agility for the serpentine curves threading through Brighton's cramped goods yards, where turn radii could drop below 100 feet. Billington's answer was the radial trailing truck, a sophisticated arrangement of springs and pivots that would theoretically allow the wheelbase to flex through tight corners while maintaining stability. The theory collapsed the moment the first E2s entered service. At New Haven Harbor in the summer of 1923, engine number 104, nicknamed Boxer by its crew, derailed 3 times in a single week on the fish dock approach. The radial truck that was supposed to guide the locomotive smoothly through curves instead created a dangerous oscillation. Under load, the geometry of Billington's innovation turned the rear axle into a liability, allowing it to climb the railhead at precisely the wrong moment. Inspectors from the Chief Mechanical Engineer's office watched in dismay as the same curves that J. Stroudley's earlier E1 class engines navigated without incident sent E2s lurching off the metals with alarming regularity. The numbers told a damning story. Between 1913 and 1930, the 10 E2 locomotives recorded an average of 4.7 derailments per engine per year on the New Haven and Brighton dock lines. The comparable E1 class, working the same routes with similar loads, averaged just 1.2 derailments per engine annually. weight distribution compounded the problem. Those generous side tanks, holding 1,200 gallons of water, raised the E2 center of gravity by nearly 8 inches compared to conventional saddle tank designs. Engineers described the engines as top-heavy and prone to rocking, especially when the tanks ran full and the coal bunker sat empty. The E2's problems weren't just inconvenient, they were dangerous. And in the confined spaces of a busy commercial dock, where fishermen worked beside the rails and horses pulled carts between the sidings, danger meant disaster waiting to happen. On a cold morning in January 1927, engine number 104 was shunting coal wagons at New Haven when its Westinghouse brake system failed without warning. The locomotive, pushing 6 loaded wagons up the incline toward the coal stage, suddenly lost all braking power. Driver Arthur Mills threw the reversing lever and opened the regulator wide, desperately trying to use engine resistance to slow the runaway train. It wasn't enough. Boxer crashed through the wooden buffer stops at the top of the coal stage, tore through 20 feet of wooden decking, and came to rest with its front wheels dangling over the edge of the embankment. The coal wagons behind it telescoped together, spilling 40 tons of anthracite across the tracks below. Mills escaped with bruises and a formal reprimand. The railway's insurance company paid out £340 in damages. The incident report blamed driver error, but the maintenance logs told a different story. The E2's brake rigging, cramped beneath those oversized side tanks, was nearly impossible to inspect properly and prone to hidden failures. 4 years later, at Brighton's main shed, engine number 100 was coupling to a rake of passenger coaches when its drawbar sheared clean through. The coupling failed under what should have been routine stress, sending the engine lurching forward into the coaches with enough force to crack the end frames of 3 first-class carriages. Passengers waiting on the platform heard the splintering crash and watched fitters swarm the scene, red-faced and swearing. The damaged coaches were pulled from service for 2 weeks of repairs, while number 100 sat in the shops waiting for a replacement drawbar to be fabricated. Standard couplings didn't fit the E2's unique frame geometry. Every repair meant custom metalwork and lost operating days. The pattern of minor derailments continued to plague the class. A hop off the rails in a goods yard might cost only 20 minutes and a crew of 6 men with crowbars and jacks. But those 20-minute delays added up. Lost work hours, damaged goods, missed connections. Drivers complained bitterly to their union representatives about the engine's handling. The view from the cab was terrible, with those bulging side tanks blocking sight lines to the track ahead during reversing moves. The ride was rough and jarring, transmitting every rail joint through the frame. One driver described it in his report as like steering a drunk elephant through a china shop. The end came quickly and without ceremony. British Railways inherited the E2 class when nationalisation swept across Britain's fragmented rail network in 1948. Fresh accountants with sharp pencils reviewed the maintenance records, operating costs, and incident reports. The E2s were immediately flagged for early withdrawal. Between 1955 and 1963, the cutting torches came for all 10 locomotives. Engine number 100 was pulled from service in September 1961 and towed to Eastleigh Works, where salvage crews reduced it to scrap metal within 3 weeks. The steel sold for £840, more than the engine was worth as a working machine. Number 104, the troublesome Boxer that had crashed through the coal stage decades earlier, met the torch at Brighton in 1959. Numbers 101 through 109 followed in quick succession, their boilers cut apart, side tanks hauled away as recyclable steel, frames broken up for their copper and brass fittings. The British preservation movement was gathering steam by the early 1960s, saving express locomotives like Flying Scotsman and rescuing elegant tank engines for heritage railways sprouting across the countryside. But nobody wanted an E2. The preservation societies focused on glamorous machines with romantic histories, locomotives that had pulled named expresses or set speed records. The E2 class had no such credentials to offer. They were humble shunters with problematic track records and zero public appeal. Museum curators reviewing acquisition lists passed over the E2s without a second glance. There were better examples of industrial tank engines available, machines with sterling service records, and lower maintenance requirements. The irony is almost painful. In 1945, Reverend Wilbert Awdry published a children's book featuring a cheeky blue tank engine named Thomas, reportedly inspired by E2 number 70. The character appeared in story after story, teaching young readers about responsibility and friendship. But by the time Thomas the Tank Engine became a television phenomenon in 1984, every single real E2 locomotive had vanished from British rails. The one exception proves the rule. The Bluebell Railway preserved engine number 100, but only after the Thomas television series made the character famous. The museum doesn't celebrate the E2's engineering or operational history. Instead, the locomotive wears blue paint and a smiling face, transformed into a living replica of a fictional character. Visitors snap photographs with Thomas, never knowing they're posing beside a class of engines so problematic that railways couldn't scrap them fast enough. In the end, fiction saved what reality had condemned. Inside the offices at Brighton Works, the accountants sharpened their pencils and began tallying the true cost of Lawson-Billington's innovation. The numbers painted a picture that no amount of engineering pride could hide. Operating records from 1928 showed that E2 locomotives consumed between 38 and 42 pounds of coal per mile during typical shunting duties, burning 15 to 20% more fuel than the railway's newer E4 and E5 class engines doing identical work. Water consumption told the same story. Those 1,200-gallon side tanks needed refilling after barely 6 hours of operation, while comparable designs could work an entire shift without visiting the water column. The maintenance costs cut deeper still. For every 100 miles of service, an E2 required an average of 4.2 hours in the repair shops. The railway's E6 class shunters, introduced in the 1920s with conventional designs and proven components, needed only 2.8 hours per 100 miles. The difference meant higher wage bills for fitters, boilermakers, and wheel turners. It meant engines sitting idle in shop bays, while revenue-earning work went to other locomotives. Brighton Works calculated that operating a single E2 for a year cost the railway approximately 340 pounds more than running a more reliable engine on the same diagram. When the Southern Railway absorbed the London, Brighton, and South Coast in 1923, Chief Mechanical Engineer Richard Mounsell inherited the E2 problem along with hundreds of other locomotives. His verdict was swift and unforgiving. Internal memos from 1931 recommended phasing out the entire E2 class as soon as replacement engines could be sourced. Mounsell's engineering team saw no point in throwing good money after bad, trying to fix fundamental design flaws when proven alternatives already existed. The plan called for systematic withdrawal beginning in 1935, with all 10 engines gone by 1940. Then came September 1939 and the outbreak of war. Hitler's invasion of Poland transformed Britain's railways overnight. Every locomotive, no matter how worn or problematic, suddenly became essential to the war effort. The E2s received a reprieve not because anyone wanted to keep them, but because scrapping serviceable engines during wartime was unthinkable. They soldiered on through 6 years of conflict, moving ammunition, supplies, and the endless freight that kept Britain fighting. But the accountants never forgot. The moment peace returned, the reckoning would begin. The E2s had survived 2 world wars, but they couldn't survive a spreadsheet. The E2 class failed because Lawson-Billington prioritized innovation over reliability. His radial trailing truck was a solution searching for a problem, an elegant piece of engineering that looked impressive in technical drawings, but created dangerous instability on actual track. The design addressed theoretical challenges with tight radius curves, while ignoring the practical reality that simpler locomotives already handled those same curves without incident. Brighton Works was locked in rivalry with other railway workshops across southern England, each chief mechanical engineer trying to outdo the others with clever patents and novel arrangements. Billington chose novelty over proven principles, and his crews paid the price in derailments, accidents, and endless frustration. The railway compounded the error by continuing production even after the first units revealed their flaws. Between 1913 and 1916, Brighton Works built all 10 E2 locomotives despite mounting evidence that the design was fundamentally compromised. This was the sunk cost fallacy in action. Money and prestige had already been invested in Billington's vision, so the railway kept building rather than admitting the design had failed. Each new E2 represented another expensive mistake rolling out of the workshops. History is littered with similar failures. The Great Western Railway's broad gauge looked brilliant on paper, but proved incompatible with the rest of Britain's network and had to be abandoned at enormous cost. The LNER's experimental W1 locomotive promised revolutionary performance, but spent more time being rebuilt than actually working. Compare these complicated failures to the humble workhorses that outlasted them. Great Western's Pannier tanks and the LMS Ginty 060Ts were boring, conventional, and utterly reliable. They worked for decades because their designers prioritized function over flash. The pattern holds across industries. Complex solutions that dazzle in boardroom. Presentations often fail on the shop floor, while simple, proven approaches quietly get the job done. The deepest irony belongs to Thomas himself. The character teaches children about being really useful, about pride in honest work, and the value of reliability. Yet the real E2 locomotives embodied the opposite: costly, unreliable, and dangerous to operate. We remember the cheerful blue engine from storybooks and television. We forget the maintenance logs, the accident reports, and the cold economic calculations that condemned the real machines to the scrapyard. Cultural memory preserved the fiction while erasing the truth. Next time you see Thomas the Tank Engine, remember he's based on a locomotive so problematic that railways couldn't get rid of them fast enough. Sometimes the best stories come from the worst machines. What do you think? Can a bad design become a good story? Or does nostalgia erase the lessons we should have learned?